Now, the item at the top of everyone's agendas, or everyone's list today, is obviously the government's immediate agenda as set out in the throne speech. So let me turn to that. Our government laid out very clearly what we will do in our campaign platform. And Albertans elected a stable majority government to implement that plan. In this session of the legislature, we're getting down to work to keep the commitments Albertans voted for. The throne speech that you have in your hands sets out what those first steps will be. Bill 1, an act to renew democracy in Alberta, will end corporate and union donations to political parties in Alberta. Our political system has been far too dependent on funds from a narrow range of donors with deep pockets, and too far removed from the interests of ordinary people. Our second bill is an act to restore fairness to public revenue. And we will see through that, we will see a modest rise in corporate taxes on profitable firms. And it will reintroduce progressive income taxes for earners at the highest income levels. In this, we are ending Alberta's brief and unfortunate experiment with what I've always said I believe was a regressive flat tax. And we are returning to a more typical, and I would suggest more fair, Canadian tax system. Now, our third piece of legislation will be an interim supply bill, and that will restore and maintain predictable, stable funding for public services while we work on the budget. In the interim, the supply bill will ensure that hospitals can continue to care for the sick and that schools have what they need to educate our children.
I think that it would have been helpful for Alberta families and Alberta businesses to get a much clearer picture of this government's priorities and how the future of Alberta's economy will be laid out. On Bill 1, the Act to Renew Democracy in Alberta, barring any surprises in the text, Wild Rose will completely support this bill. It has always been Wild Rose policy that only individuals, not corporations, not unions, and not governments, should make contributions to political parties. On Bill 2, Restoring Fairness in Public Revenue Bill, I don't think it comes as any surprise that Wild Rose will vote against any bills that will raise taxes on Albertans. On Bill 3, we have to see exactly what is in the mini budget bill before we can do anything about it. Obviously, we have to fund operations of the government, but we won't decide on this bill until we actually see the legislation.
On the government bills, on the corporate tax, we don't support that increase. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody here. There's a lot of, Alberta's an exporting economy between energy, agriculture, forestry, and tourism. We get our money, Albertans make their livings and get their money from other places. On Bill 1, it is I like the words used to increase democracy and fairness and transparency. They're nice words. Unfortunately, Bill 1, in my estimation, does exactly the opposite. It's a little disappointing to me that and in fairness to the government, and I'll repeat what I said earlier, it is a promise the government made, so I won't criticize them for keeping their promise. The problem with it is a naked attempt to tilt the political scale in the current government's balance.
With today's bipartisan announcements, the Premier has shown that she recognized that opposition matters. And on that theme, I do have some comments on what we saw and didn't see in the throne speech. First of all, we're standing on Treaty 6 land, and I was pleased to see two mentions in the throne speech, acknowledging the important debt that we owe First Nations and their importance to our future.
I'm wondering, what did you think of Rick McIver was responding to the Bill 1 and how banning corporate and union donations would actually decrease transparency and openness? And I'm just wondering what you thought of that response.
Nonsense. Next question. We have the best democracy money can buy in Alberta. That has to change, and this is part of the solution.
What concerns me is not so much what's in the throne speech, but what's not in the throne speech. There was an opportunity here, and there remains an opportunity with the new government to fundamentally transform Alberta's public service, to depoliticize the public service, especially at senior levels, to ensure that the value of money is considered in every government decision. We've seen a lot on the spending side. We have seen very little, if anything, on the question of how we better manage Alberta's public services, how we better steward Alberta taxpayer resources.
When you look at what's on the agenda here, and I know it's going to be a short thing, but just 3 bills, were you hoping for a bigger chunk of issues to be covered in this?
You know, I want to give the government an opportunity to get their bearings. It is a big task. After 44 years, I understand that there's going to be a lot. It's going to take a lot to really understand and dig into all of the issues that need to be addressed. So I don't have an enormous concern that we're dealing only with 3 bills over the course of a couple of weeks or so.